Hey everyone, Simon here. Welcome back to another episode of Hong Kong Horror. So tonight's story is from a viewer from Hong Kong. Now, this story didn't happen to her directly, but it's a story that's been shared with her from her work. Our main character for tonight, let's call her Linda, took over the lease of an apartment from a coworker. She thought she would be moving closer to work, but little did she know, there was a nasty little surprise waiting for her at this new unit. As always, please stick around till after the story, where I'm going to break everything down from a Chinese cultural perspective to see if we can figure out exactly what happened here. Alright, let's turn on the lights, get comfortable, and let's dive right into this one. Linda had always been a very independent person. She doesn't like to rely on her family because she knew that they were struggling themselves, so she felt bad asking for any sort of help. Ever since she started working, she's moved out on her own and lived her own life. Even though her family was in Hong Kong, she preferred living alone, where she could enjoy the freedom. It's not that she didn't enjoy living at home with her family, but it was just easier to not have to answer to anyone, you know? She could come home anytime she wants, without anyone asking her where she went. Like many of us, after a certain age, it's tough living with parents, especially in a cramped two-bedroom apartment. Over the years, Linda gained a lot of experience renting apartments and could easily sense if a place had bad vibes just by walking in, allowing her to avoid a lot of trouble. She's been lucky so far though, where all of the units she's rented thus far have been pretty good choices. She would have the occasional noisy neighbor, but that's a bit unavoidable with the apartments in Hong Kong. In her 4th year of working as a flight attendant, she was offered a great promotion, but it required her to take on longer international flights where her hours would be longer. She decided to take the leap and began looking for a new apartment, somewhere that she could be a little bit closer to the airport. Now, finding an apartment in Hong Kong isn't difficult, but finding one at an affordable price is the hard part. Luckily, a senior colleague at work overheard her complaining about the prices of all the units she's looked at so far. He offered her his own apartment that he was renting, as he was actually planning to move back in with his parents to save money. He wanted to get out of the lease, so he would be willing to transfer it to Linda. The apartment was only a 5-minute walk from the bus stop that she would take to work, so Linda immediately went to see it. Nice and close to the airport. It was an old apartment and nothing fancy, but the location was great, and the price was amazing. As soon as she walked into the unit to check it out, Linda felt a strange suffocating stuffiness in the air. Her coworker that was going to transfer the unit to her was giving her a tour of the place. Linda saw that all of the windows were closed, so she brushed off the feeling as poor ventilation. The landlord was fine with Linda taking over the lease, so she signed it that same day. Looking back later, she remembered how that senior colleague looked incredibly relieved, almost as if a heavy burden had been lifted off him the moment the contract was signed. The first month was peaceful. Linda settled into her cozy new home. She was a very frugal person, so she didn't really have much belongings to move. The apartment came furnished, which was perfect. With her promotion, Linda became incredibly busy as she took on more international flights. She would return home at strange hours, exhausted, and most of the time she would immediately pass out as soon as she got home. But soon, strange things began to happen. First, it was the weird dreams. She began having very strange dreams that she couldn't fully remember, but it always felt like she was not well rested after waking. She would wake up exhausted, like she didn't sleep at all. She figured it was probably due to exhaustion with her new hours. She just needed to adjust to it. One Friday night, feeling exceptionally drained after work, she decided to order some takeout and inexplicably spaced out after placing the order on her phone. For some reason, which she couldn't fully explain, she walked over to the ceiling fan, turned it on, and stood completely frozen directly under the spinning blades of the fan, looking up at it. Before closing her eyes, she remembers feeling the slight breeze of the wind on her face. It felt nice. While in this trance, she felt a bizarre sensation. The wind felt like a feather brushing against her face. It tickled her cheeks, and for some strange reason, it felt really good. The next thing Linda knew, her doorbell was going off. It was her food delivery. To her surprise, she had been standing under that fan for about 30 minutes, but it didn't feel like 30 minutes had passed at all. To her, it felt more like 30 seconds. She snapped out of it, confused about why she was standing there. The doorbell rang again. "Coming, sorry," Linda shouted at her front door as she scrambled to open it, not wanting to keep the delivery man waiting. She opened the door, took her food from the delivery guy, who was a young man who looked like he was in high school. He must be doing this on the side, making some extra spending money. The strange thing was, this young man didn't once look Linda in the eye. He handed her the bag of food quickly, but as Linda was looking at him, she noticed his eyes were looking past her into her apartment. The color seemed to drain from his face as he was looking inside. "Hey, are you okay?" Linda asked him. That's when his gaze finally broke from looking inside her apartment, and he looked her in the eye quickly in passing as he muttered, "Huh? Oh, yes, sorry. Have a good night," before he power walked back to the elevators. He looked like he was in a rush. Huh, what a strange kid, Linda thought. He must have a ton of other orders to deliver, she told herself, as she closed the door with her bag of food. That was the first night that she developed this strange habit of standing under the fan, letting the gentle breeze blow on her face. For some odd reason that she couldn't quite explain, it felt extremely peaceful to do this. At the time, she couldn't tell you why she did this. She knew it was weird, but it felt so right. Linda noticed that whenever she did this, she lost track of time. After a long day of work, the first thing she would do after taking her shoes off would be to turn on the fan and just stand under there, face up toward the fan, eyes closed, as she unwinded with the gentle breeze brushing her cheeks. She would feel herself space out in a groggy sleep-like trance, anywhere from a few minutes to nearly an hour. It was intoxicating. Strangely, Linda's mind brushed off the terrifying reality of this, though her subconscious knew that something was very wrong. Anyone looking in from the outside could tell you that something was very wrong here. Soon, her cheeks started to break out in these strange hives. It didn't itch, but it was painful. It was like she was beginning to have some kind of allergic reaction to something. She went to the dermatologist to get this checked out pretty quickly, as this affected her work. She was the face of the airline that she worked for, so having these hives visible looked super embarrassing. The dermatologist ran all kinds of tests, and surprisingly, couldn't find anything wrong. There was nothing that she was allergic to that could have caused this. All he could tell Linda was to make sure to keep her face clean, wash it regularly with a gentle face wash, and gave her some over-the-counter antihistamines to see if it would help bring down the hives. He told her to monitor it and to come back if it gets any worse. Linda was frustrated because that visit didn't give her any answers at all. It was just a waste of time. She still had to go to work like this, so she would just put on extra heavy makeup and try to hide the hives as best as she could. Next, the dreams escalated. She started dreaming of a woman inside her apartment. In the dream, it was always the same scene. Linda would see this woman hanging by her neck on her ceiling fan. The woman was in her late 20s with long black hair. She would just stare at Linda in this dream, emotionless, standing on a chair with the rope slack around her neck. Then, she would kick the chair from out under her and force Linda to watch. It was always the same dream, over and over again. Soon, the dark thoughts began to creep into Linda's mind. Thoughts of wanting to hurt herself. Thoughts of her not wanting to be a part of this world anymore. These thoughts would always come out of nowhere when she was at home, just doing regular everyday things. She could be showering or watching TV or something, and suddenly a wave of intense grief would wash over her. It was as if these thoughts were not her own. She's never been depressed or anything like that in her entire life. But for some reason, these strange thoughts kept coming in waves, but then it would fade away just as quickly. One day, after a long flight, one of her coworkers that she's close to, Tina, asked if she could crash at Linda's apartment for the night. Their flight back to Hong Kong was delayed, so it was now extremely late, about 3 a.m. Of course Linda was fine with this. They were good friends. They could even split the price of the cab since all of the buses were done running for the night. Tina lived a lot further from the airport than Linda does, so it would make more sense to just crash at Linda's for the night until the buses started running again. It would be much cheaper than having to cab it all the way back for her. Tina's family ran a Taoist temple, so she's definitely more knowledgeable about things related to the supernatural. She even has sensitivities to spirits where she can occasionally see them. As they gathered their luggage from the carousel and left the airport, they hopped into a taxi together. They were both exhausted. They were chatting away, complaining about the passengers they had on this flight. Once they got back to Linda's apartment, the moment they unlocked the door, Tina's smile vanished almost instantly. She took a sharp breath as she stood there, paralyzed at the doorway. Oblivious, Linda continued walking inside as she was ahead of Tina, and naturally fell into her usual trance under the ceiling fan. Suddenly, Linda felt a powerful yank on her arm. In just a few seconds, Tina dragged her completely out of the apartment and down to the street. Before Linda could ask what was happening, Tina hailed a late-night cab on the side of the road and pushed Linda inside. Tina told Linda to just shut up and not to ask any questions right now. They were headed to Tina's parents' house, which was out in one of the villages. Linda had no idea what was going on, but she trusted Tina and obeyed. She didn't ask any questions. When they arrived, Tina tried to drag Linda into her parents' house. To Linda's shock, her body refused. It was like her body wouldn't listen to her and just flat out refused to enter the house. Then, a voice came out of Linda's throat that wasn't her own. It was a gruff, aggressive woman's voice yelling, "Don't you dare get in my way!" Tina, who didn't even look scared at all, calmly retorted, "My colleague has no grudge against you. Do not possess her." The voice inside Linda then replied, "Mind your own business." Linda recalls all of this, but it felt like she was watching the whole scene play out in front of her from a third-person perspective. As Tina was trying to get Linda to go inside the house, losing patience, Tina tried to use brute force to drag Linda into the house. All the screaming and shouting woke Tina's parents up as her dad came outside in his pajamas to see what all the commotion was about. Taking one look at Linda, he instantly knew what was happening. He came out to help Tina. The two of them managed to drag Linda inside the house finally. Tina's dad, a Taoist priest, pushed Linda into a chair in their living room, which looked more like a temple hall, and began a heavy exorcism ritual. During the process, Linda's face felt like it was burning on fire, and she nearly passed out from the dizziness. Honestly, this was when her memory was still lapsing. She only remembers patches of the event and the intense pain she felt as this was happening, like being burned. Eventually, the burning stopped, and the priest gave her a few spare talismans. Only then did Tina explain to Linda what she had seen in the apartment. When the door opened, a terrible stench poured out of the apartment. As Tina looked inside, she saw someone inside, hanging from the center of the fan on the ceiling. She had long black hair, her neck bent at an unnatural angle. The rope was extremely long, so the woman's feet were just barely off the ground. She was hanging from this fan, but not very high up. This ghost had an extremely long tongue that was hanging from her mouth, slack. It was as if she was waiting for Linda to come home. Tina watched as Linda entered a trance-like state and walked over to this ghost and just stood there, eyes closed. The ghost slowly turned to Linda and repeatedly licked Linda's face. To Linda's shock, the gentle breeze she's been feeling wasn't a breeze at all. It was the spirit's tongue. Furious at being used as a scapegoat to take over the lease at this apartment, Linda tried to contact a senior colleague who had pushed this haunted apartment onto her. However, she couldn't reach him at all. Other colleagues informed her that the senior had suddenly resigned. After transferring the lease to Linda, he quit and vanished and was never heard from again from anyone at the company. When she tried to get more information from the landlord, this wasn't much help either. The landlord was an impatient man in his 60s. He told her that she was making things up to try to break the lease, and that there was no way he was going to give her her deposit back. Even though Tina's dad told Linda that everything should be fine now and that the spirit was gone, Linda was way too terrified to go back to that apartment again. She moved back home with her parents the very next morning, even though it meant that she was going to lose her deposit. So, Hong Kong Horror family, what do you think happened here to Linda? Please, pause the video here and let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Alright, now let's move into the analysis. What do I personally think happened here from a Chinese cultural perspective? Now, I just want to reiterate that these are just my own personal thoughts on what I think happened here to Linda. Now, I would consider this situation a haunting, but it goes beyond that. I think an important question we should be thinking about is what kind of relationship was this dead woman trying to establish with Linda? I don't believe this was a straightforward case of a ghost attacking a tenant. It was a process of something we call 重音, which means reenactment, combined with 借身, borrowing a body. The hanging woman did not simply want Linda to see her death. She appeared to be grooming Linda's body to reproduce it. Linda first begins standing directly underneath the fan without understanding why. She closes her eyes, loses her awareness of time, and experiences the contact as a soothing experience rather than a scary one. As time goes on, she repeatedly dreams of the dead woman standing on a chair and hanging herself from that same fan. Finally, thoughts of ending herself randomly begin entering Linda's mind when she's inside of that apartment. I think that the spirit was creating something we call 谁法感应, a sympathetic connection to the manner of death. This is when a person that died violently remains attached not only to a location, but to the final sequence of actions that produced their death. The chair, the fan, and the position underneath the fan all become part of a repeated death pattern. This is deeper than saying she died there, so she haunts the fan. The fan is functioning like something we call 死亡會介, which means a medium of death. It's an object through which the living tenant is brought into contact with the dead person's final experience. These objects and physical arrangements surrounding an unnatural death can retain narrative importance because they provide the dead with a recognizable route back to the event. I also want to touch on the idea of Seilo, which translates to Road of Death. The woman's death had a sequence. She stood under that fan, prepared the rope, mounted the chair, kicked the chair away, and died suspended in that exact location. Linda was being placed at the beginning of that same route. At first, Linda only stands beneath the fan. Then she becomes emotionally comfortable there. Then she sees the complete act in her dreams. She begins receiving the dead woman's despair. It's very possible that the ghost was not yet commanding Linda to die. It was slowly making death feel familiar. This is what I would call soksei, which means becoming accustomed to death. Linda is pretty much being desensitized, just like how you would acclimate your pet goldfish to water before you put them into a tank. The fan stops being threatening and becomes peaceful. Losing 30 minutes no longer alarms her. The sensation on her face becomes comforting. Her own warning instincts are being reversed. Many of us see possession movies or hear stories, and I think many times we imagine the spirit forcing the victims to do something against their will. But that isn't always the case. Many times, the spirit will spend a lot of time altering what their target experiences as desirable. The dead woman does not drag Linda over to the fan. She makes Linda want to stand there herself. The spirit is not just planting thoughts into Linda's head. It's actually interfering with Linda's ability to recognize where her own impulses end and the ghost's influence begins. This is why Linda knows that her behavior is strange, but yet, it still feels right. This is much more advanced than a simple haunting, and touches upon why possessions are possible. It's something we call yinim samyap, which means the seepage of another's will into the victim's thought process. Once the foreign impulse no longer feels foreign, possession becomes much easier because the victim stops resisting before the spirit ever needs to overpower them. The dreams can also be understood more deeply than ordinary spirit communication. I don't think that this woman was just showing Linda a memory. She may have been performing what we call Mengzhong Chunying, which means transmitting a form through dreams. Linda is repeatedly shown the woman's method of death. The dream becomes a rehearsal space as Linda watches the same scene every night. The action becomes more familiar, and the dead woman's death becomes easier for Linda's mind to reproduce. In that sense, the dream isn't just a message. It's more like instructions. Then, there's the spirit's tongue. This long tongue is a very recognizable image in Chinese ghost stories because it's associated with a person who's died by hanging. But the more interesting part to me is that the ghost is licking Linda's face. Tina, the friend, sees the ghost repeatedly licking Linda's face, while Linda only experiences it as a pleasant breeze. This is a form of laogei, which means leaving a mark, or yingyan, which translates to spiritually identifying someone. The ghost is not simply touching Linda, she's strengthening a bond. The face is especially important because it's the seat of social identity. It's how other people recognize you and how you recognize yourself. By repeatedly touching Linda's face, the ghost may symbolically be crossing into Linda's identity. Now, this ghost did not take Linda over immediately, which is fairly common in many possession cases. It first waited for fatigue to weaken her concentration, then used repetitive behavior to deepen the trance. The strange loss of time was not just the ghost making her unconscious. It may have been the process of dutsun, which means taking control of attention and conscious presence in short intervals. It's usually a process that takes time. At first, Linda loses 30 minutes. Later, she loses control of her body at Tina's family home. Eventually, another voice speaks through her body. This is a clear escalation from influence over attention to influence over movement and speech. Linda consciously wants to enter Tina's parents' home, but her body refuses. Then, the woman's voice speaks through her and protests against Linda's interference. This suggests to me that the ghost's control was not limited to the apartment. That's important because it tells us that the attachment has already shifted from ide, which translates to depending on a place, to ian, which means depending on a person. At the beginning of the story, the woman seems anchored to the van and the apartment. By the time Linda is brought to Tina's house, the ghost travels with her. That means that Linda herself has now become the new carrying medium. This is one of the clearest signs that the situation has progressed beyond a location haunting. Chinese ghost stories often allow the dead to be both victims and aggressors. Spirits can behave unpredictably, selfishly, deceptively, or unjustly rather than following a neat system of moral compensation. This woman may have suffered terribly in life, but she is now reproducing that suffering in Linda. Ultimately, I think what this ghost wants to do is something you might be familiar with, called taisan, or finding a replacement. The common interpretation of one taisan is that a ghost must kill another person in the same manner of their own death in order to move on. In this story, I wouldn't necessarily say that the spirit wants Linda to replace her so that she can immediately reincarnate. I think something more subtle might be happening. Linda might be becoming something we call 承死者, a carrier of the death. The ghost is transferring the emotional and behavioral pattern of her death into another living person. Even before Linda physically dies, she's already carrying the woman's despair, routines, dreams, bodily position, and suicidal impulse. So the quote-unquote replacement may begin psychologically and spiritually before it becomes physical. Linda is first made to resemble the dead woman inwardly. Only later would she potentially reproduce this death outwardly. This is why the possession at Tina's house is so revealing. When the ghost says, "Don't you dare get in my way," she's reacting as though Tina is interfering with something already well underway. To me, this suggests an attempted takeover that was not yet complete. We call this dutse. Dutse literally means seizing another's dwelling, with the body imagined as the dwelling of consciousness. The ghost has not fully erased Linda. Linda could still observe what was happening. She could still remember the confrontation, but she could no longer consistently control her body. This hasn't yet reached the state of total possession, but it's getting there. This is contested occupancy. The burning sensation during the ritual is interesting. Linda feels as though her face and body are burning, while Tina's dad performs the exorcism. The priest isn't burning the ghost, but as the ritual forces apart two presences that had begun to overlap, this pain is experienced through Linda because the attachment is no longer external. The soul's contact has become entangled with Linda's own sensory system. The ritual is therefore less like removing someone standing next to her, and more like separating two pieces that have started to stick together. Now, did the former tenant know about all of this? It's hard to say. He most likely had some sort of scary experience of his own while he lived in that apartment, but we have no idea to what extent. When he transferred the lease over to Linda, this would resemble something we call yi wo, which means shifting misfortune or redirecting a harmful influence. So, to summarize all this into a TLDR version, the hanging woman was not simply haunting the apartment because she died there. She was attempting to recreate her death through a living person. She first established bodily connection, then altered Linda's sense of comfort before entering her dreams and transmitting emotion and feelings of Linda wanting to end herself, before finally gaining enough access to interfere with movement and speech. The real danger here was that she gradually stopped recognizing the ghost's influence as foreign. By the time Tina intervened, the dead woman had already moved from the fan into Linda's habits, from Linda's habits into her dreams, and from her dreams into her emotions, and from her emotions into her body. Thank you, Hong Kong Horror family, for making it to the end of this week's episode. I hope you enjoyed this story and breakdown. Until we speak again next week, stay safe and good night.